In the hushed, opulent world of five-star dining, some names are spoken only in whispers. At Chicago's most exclusive restaurant, the Gilded Quill, one name was a thunderclap of fear: Genevieve Davenport. She was the millionaire's wife, a woman whose cruelty was as legendary as her husband's fortune. She could end a career with a single cutting remark. For years she reigned supreme, a flawless tyrant in a kingdom of crystal and silver. But tyrants always have a weakness. They build their empires on foundations of lies. And what happens when a new waitress, a quiet, observant woman with nothing to lose, and a past she thought she'd left behind, starts pulling at the threads? This isn't a story about revenge. It's about the quiet dismantling of a monster, one perfectly served meal at a time. The air inside the Gilded Quill tasted of money. It was a complex, layered flavor, a base note of aged leather from the Chesterfield sofas in the lounge, a mid-note of expensive French perfume mingling with the scent of beeswax from the polished oak paneling, and a sharp metallic top note of ambition. For Chloe Mitchell, it was the taste of desperation. Just 3 months ago, she'd been a junior research assistant for Daniel Peterson, one of Chicago's most tenacious investigative journalists, meticulously cross-referencing sources and chasing down obscure public records. Then the newspaper had downsized, and her dream along with her salary evaporated. Now she was adjusting the ridiculously stiff collar of a uniform that cost more than her last 3 pairs of shoes combined. Her first shift was a dizzying ballet of rules. Water glasses were to be filled to precisely 1 inch below the rim, never more, never less. Bread plates were cleared from the left entrees, served from the right. A dropped fork was to be ignored until the guest looked away, at which point it was to be retrieved with a silent, swift elegance that bordered on magic. The one rule that wasn't written in the thick employee handbook was the most important one. It was delivered by Liam, the veteran bartender, whose face was a roadmap of late nights and cynical observations. He was polishing a highball glass with a linen cloth, his movements economical and practiced. "See that table?" he murmured, nodding his head towards the corner booth, the most coveted seat in the house, currently empty. "Table 7, that's the throne, and the Queen arrives at 8 every Friday." Chloe followed his gaze. The booth was upholstered in plush burgundy velvet set slightly apart from the others, offering both privacy and a commanding view of the entire dining room. The Queen, Genevieve Davenport. Liam said, his voice dropping an octave. He placed the glass on the rack, the crystal ringing softly. "Wife of Richard Davenport. You know Davenport Industries, the man who basically owns half the steel used in this city's skyscrapers." Chloe knew the name. Everyone in Chicago did. Richard Davenport was a titan, a figure of immense power and quiet influence. His wife, however, was a different kind of famous. She was a fixture in the society pages, always immaculate, always poised her smile, a perfect frozen sculpture. "She's our most important regular," Liam continued, his eyes scanning the room. "And our most feared. Don't make eye contact unless she addresses you. Don't speak unless spoken to. If she asks for her water, with a single perfectly square ice cube and a lemon slice cut at a 30-degree angle, you go to the kitchen and you find a protractor, if you have to. One mistake, one perceived slight, and she will not rest until she sees you personally fired and possibly blacklisted from every fine dining establishment west of the Hudson." Chloe felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This was more than just a demanding customer. This was a predator. "Is she really that bad?" Liam gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Last month a busboy, Kevin, a kid just saving up for college, accidentally brushed her cashmere wrap with his tray. It didn't even fall, just touched it. She claimed he'd soiled it with his commonness. She made such a scene that Mr. Henderson, the manager, had to fire him on the spot, right in the middle of service. She watched him cry as he took off his apron. Seemed to enjoy it. The story settled like a stone in Chloe's gut. In her previous job, she'd dealt with arrogant executives and evasive politicians, but this was a different breed of cruelty, personal, petty, and performed for an audience. At precisely 8:00 p.m., a hush fell over the entrance. The hostess, a young woman named Amelia, whose smile seemed permanently strained, practically bowed as she led the couple to table 7. Richard Davenport was tall and broad-shouldered, his greying hair impeccably styled. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to the world reshaping itself around him. But all eyes were on his wife. Genevieve Davenport was a masterpiece of cold perfection. Her blonde hair was swept into an elaborate chignon, not a single strand out of place. A sheath of a midnight blue dress clung to her slender frame, and a cascade of diamonds glittered at her throat. But it was her face that was most striking. It was beautiful undeniably, but it was a hard, unforgiving beauty like a statue carved from ice. Her eyes, a pale, chilly blue, swept across the dining room, and Chloe could feel the staff flinch as her gaze passed over them. It was a look of assessment and instant dismissal. Chloe was assigned to the station adjacent to table 7, a nerve-wracking proximity. For the first hour she focused on her own tables, her movements becoming more fluid as she found her rhythm. She could hear Genevieve's voice, a low, controlled tone that carried despite its softness. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. Her power was in her precision. She sent back her Sauvignon Blanc because she detected a cloying note of melon, despite the sommelier's gentle insistence that it was a hallmark of the vintage. She complained that the ambient lighting was casting an unflattering shadow on her husband's face. Each complaint was a small test, a reassertion of her dominance. The real display came during the main course. A young waiter named Sam, his face pale with nerves, was serving the table next to the Davenports. As he leaned in to place a plate of seared scallops before a guest, his sleeve cuff, for a fraction of a second, hovered over the edge of Genevieve's side plate. He didn't touch it. He wasn't even close. But Genevieve recoiled as if he'd tried to poison her. "Excuse me," she said. The two words cut through the dining room's murmur. Sam froze, his blood draining from his face. "Yes, Mrs. Davenport." "Did you see what you just did?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Your arm. It was over my plate. My food." I'm so sorry, Mrs. Davenport. I didn't touch anything." "You didn't have to," she replied, placing her fork down with a deliberate click. "The air is contaminated. The very thought of your sleeve, which has brushed against who knows what today, hovering over my meal, it's simply unhygienic. I've lost my appetite." She pushed her plate of half-eaten Dover sole an inch away from her. "Take it away. All of it." Richard Davenport sighed a quiet, weary sound, but said nothing. He simply stared at his own plate, a man trapped in a gilded cage with a very beautiful, very venomous snake. Mr. Henderson materialized at the table, his face a mask of pained apology. He stammered, he groveled, he offered to have the entire dish remade by the executive chef himself. Sam stood behind him, trembling, looking like a condemned man. Chloe watched the entire pathetic spectacle. This wasn't about hygiene. It wasn't about the food. It was a power play, a public execution designed to remind everyone in the room of their place in her world. She felt a familiar fire ignite in her chest, the same indignation that had fueled her work with Daniel Peterson. It was the feeling of seeing an injustice, a gross abuse of power, and knowing it was wrong. Liam had called this place the Dragon's Lair. He was right, and Chloe Mitchell, standing in the shadows with a water pitcher in her hand, had just met the dragon. What he didn't know was that Chloe had spent the last 3 years of her life learning how to find the cracks in the armor of untouchable people. A week later, Chloe found herself in the dragon's direct line of fire. It was another busy Friday night, the dining room, a symphony of clinking glasses and moneyed laughter. By a cruel twist of fate, the waiter assigned to table 7 had called in sick with a sudden violent case of what Liam cynically termed Davenportitis. Mr. Henderson, his face ashen, had surveyed the remaining staff like a general choosing a soldier for a suicide mission. His eyes landed on Chloe. "Mitchell," he said, his voice low and tense. "You're calm under pressure. You're on table 7 tonight." A wave of sympathetic murmurs rippled through the staff. Liam caught her eye from behind the bar and gave a subtle shake of his head, a silent warning. But Chloe simply nodded. "Yes, Mr. Henderson." She spent the next 15 minutes preparing as if for battle. She reread the Davenports' file, memorizing their preferences. Genevieve favored still water, no ice, with a single paper-thin slice of lime, not lemon. She preferred her bread basket to contain only brioche, no sourdough. Richard drank a specific, single malt Scotch, Macallan 25, 2 fingers, no mixer. Every detail was a potential landmine. When the Davenports arrived, Chloe was ready. She approached the table with a practiced neutrality, her posture straight, her expression placid. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Davenport. My name is Chloe, and I will be your server tonight." Genevieve's eyes flickered over her, a cold, dismissive appraisal. She didn't acknowledge the greeting. "Still water. Lime." She clipped, already turning her attention to the menu. "Of course," Chloe replied, her tone even. She executed the initial service flawlessly. The water was presented, the Scotch poured, the brioche-only bread basket placed gently on the table. For a moment, Chloe thought she might survive the evening unscathed. The illusion shattered when Genevieve ordered the lobster bisque. 10 minutes later, Chloe placed the delicate porcelain bowl before her. The bisque was a velvety coral-colored liquid, garnished with a sprig of chervil and a drizzle of cognac cream. Genevieve stared at it for a long moment before picking up her spoon. She dipped it in, raised it halfway to her lips, and then stopped. Her eyes narrowed. She lowered the spoon and looked directly at Chloe for the first time. "Is there a problem with the kitchen tonight?" Chloe's heart began to beat a little faster. "Not at all, Mrs. Davenport. Is the bisque not to your liking?" "It's tepid," Genevieve announced, her voice resonating with theatrical disappointment. It was loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "I expect my soup to be hot. Not lukewarm. Not tepid. Hot. Is that such a difficult concept to grasp?" Chloe knew for a fact that the soup was not tepid. She had watched the sous chef ladle it from the pot herself, steam rising in a fragrant cloud. This was the test. This was the moment where she was expected to grovel, to apologize profusely, to panic. It was the first move in Genevieve's cruel game of chess. Instead of falling apart, Chloe's mind went into research mode. She observed. Genevieve wasn't looking angry, she was looking expectant. She was waiting for the fear, for the reaction that would validate her power. Chloe decided not to give it to her. "I am very sorry to hear that Mrs. Davenport," Chloe said, her voice a perfect blend of professional concern and unshakable calm. "I will have a fresh, piping hot bowl brought to you immediately." She reached for the bowl, but Genevieve placed a hand over the rim, her long, manicured fingers pressing against the porcelain. "No, don't bother. The moment is ruined." She looked at her husband. "You see, Richard, this is what I mean. The standards here are slipping, utterly slipping." Richard Davenport merely swirled the amber liquid in his glass. It's just soup, Jen. It is never just soup. Richard, she snapped back, her voice like ice. It is a reflection of a standard this waitress clearly doesn't understand. Her gaze returned to Chloe, sharp and venomous. What did you say your name was again? Chloe Mrs. Davenport. Chloe, Genevieve repeated, savoring the name as if it were a sour grape. Well, Chloe, I suggest you learn the difference between hot and tepid if you expect to last another night in this establishment. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The diners at the next table were now openly staring, their own conversations forgotten. This was the show they had come to see. Chloe held Genevieve's gaze. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I understand completely, Mrs. Davenport. Thank you for the clarification. I will ensure the rest of your meal is to your exact specifications. She retrieved the bowl of bisque and walked back towards the kitchen, her steps measured and even. She could feel every eye in the room on her back. Her composure was, in its own way, an act of defiance. An emotional outburst would have been a victory for Genevieve. Panic would have been a trophy. This calm, professional acceptance of a baseless complaint was something else entirely. It was a refusal to play the game by Genevieve's rules. When she entered the kitchen, the head chef, Antoine, a notoriously fiery Frenchman, looked at her with a mixture of pity and anger. The bisque was perfect. I checked the temperature myself. That woman is a witch. I know, Chloe said quietly. But she isn't angry about the soup. She returned to the dining room to continue the service. For the rest of the meal, Genevieve was icily silent towards her, communicating only through clipped gestures and pointed looks at her husband. But Chloe noticed something else. Genevieve kept glancing at her, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. It was the look of a predator whose prey had failed to behave as expected. She had tried to draw blood, and had been met with a placid, unyielding service. As they were leaving, Richard Davenport paused by Chloe's side for a moment, while his wife swept ahead. He pressed a folded $100 bill into her hand, discreetly. "I'm sorry about that," he mumbled, his eyes avoiding hers. "She's under a lot of stress." Chloe watched them go, the folded bill feeling like a guilty secret in her palm. It wasn't about stress. It was about power. And Chloe Mitchell, who had spent years dissecting the lives of powerful people for a living, had just realized that Genevieve Davenport's power was built on a very fragile foundation, the fear of others. And Chloe, much to her own surprise, wasn't afraid. She was curious, and for a woman like Genevieve Davenport, that was far more dangerous. The encounter with Genevieve lit a fuse in Chloe. It wasn't about revenge. It was about understanding the anatomy of a bully. In her journalism days, Daniel Peterson had taught her that the most monstrous people often lived in the most elaborate glass houses. You just had to know where to throw the stone. Chloe decided to start looking for stones. Her investigation began not on the internet, but in the trenches of the Gilded Quill. The restaurant staff was a living archive of Genevieve's tyranny, a library of whispered anecdotes and bitter memories. During lulls in service in the cramped break room that smelled of stale coffee and cleaning supplies, Chloe listened. Remember the time she claimed the sommelier was mocking her with his choice of a German Riesling, one waiter recounted. Said it was a comment on her heritage, which is ridiculous because everyone knows her family is from Boston. What about when she insisted Amelia, the hostess, change her shade of lipstick because it was too provocative for a family establishment? Another added. Amelia had to go cry in the bathroom and scrub it off. These were stories of petty cruelty, but Chloe was looking for a pattern, a vulnerability. The common thread was Genevieve's obsession with appearances, with a very specific, almost theatrical performance of old money sophistication. The wine, the lipstick, the soup, they were all props in her personal stage play. Any deviation from the script was met with disproportionate rage. This suggested insecurity, not strength. Liam the bartender became her most valuable source. One slow Tuesday night, as he polished his collection of bitters bottles, Chloe leaned against the bar. "You've been here the longest, Liam. What was she like when she first started coming in?" Liam paused his rag, circling the rim of a bottle. Different, or trying to be the same but not as good at it. This was maybe 10 years ago, right after she married Richard. She was anxious, always watching other people what fork they used, how they pronounced sommelier. She was learning a script. And Richard? He was just happy, I think. He'd been a widower for years. Genevie was beautiful, charming. He didn't see the gears turning underneath, or didn't want to. Liam leaned in closer, his voice dropping. The real interesting stuff is what nobody talks about. Before Richard, there was no Genevie. Chloe's journalistic instincts tingled. "What do you mean?" "I mean, the society pages started covering her the day her engagement to Richard was announced. Before that, nothing. It's like she just appeared out of thin air. A beautiful woman with a vague backstory about a quiet upbringing in New England. I've bartended at every high society haunt in this city for 20 years. I know all the families, the Bradfords, the Astors, the Carringtons. I'd never heard of her family, the Vances. A woman with no past. That wasn't just a stone. That was a potential fault line. That night, Chloe went home to her small apartment, the $100 bill from Richard Davenport still tucked away. She didn't spend it. It felt like evidence. She fired up her old laptop, the keyboard worn smooth from thousands of hours of research. She started where any good investigator would public records. She ran a search for Genevieve Vance, her supposed maiden name with birth dates estimated to be within a 10-year range. The results were thin. A few women with that name, none of whom matched her age or had any connection to Chicago or Boston high society. It was a digital dead end, as if the name had been plucked from a novel. So she changed tactics. She searched for Richard Davenport and Genevieve Vance, focusing on news archives from around the time of their engagement 10 years ago. She found the official announcements in the major papers, the glowing profiles in society magazines. They all repeated the same sparse details: a whirlwind romance, a shared love for philanthropy, and Genevieve's quiet, respectable background. It was all too neat, too polished. Chloe started digging into the guest lists of the charity galas and society events Richard had attended in the year leading up to their meeting. If Genevieve had been circulating in those spheres, her name would appear somewhere. She spent hours scrolling through microfiche scans of old event programs and photo captions. Nothing. It was as Liam had said. Genevieve Davenport hadn't existed in that world until she was on Richard Davenport's arm. Frustration began to set in. Chloe was chasing a ghost. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling of her apartment. Where does a person with a fabricated past hide their real one? They scrub the present, but they can't always erase the past, especially in the pre-social media era. She tried a different kind of search. She opened a reverse image search tool and uploaded one of Genevieve's official society photos. The results showed hundreds of copies of the same photo from various magazines and blogs. Useless. Then she tried a cropped version, just her face, and then another, slightly older photo from a gala 8 years ago. For hours, nothing. Just more society pictures. Then on the 12th page of results for the older photo, a strange link appeared. It led to a defunct website for a local talent agency in Bakersfield, California. The page was a poorly designed relic from the early 2000s, barely functional. But on the client headshots page, amidst a sea of aspiring actors with hopeful, desperate smiles, was a picture that made Chloe's breath catch. The photo was grainy, the quality poor. The girl in the picture was younger, maybe in her early 20s. Her hair was a brassy, over-bleached blonde, not the elegant champagne color Genevie sported now. She wore too much blue eyeshadow and cheap, shiny lip gloss. But the bone structure was undeniable. The sharp jawline, the high cheekbones, the cold, determined set of her eyes. It was her. Beneath the photo was a name, not Genevieve Vance. It was Jenny Albright. Chloe felt a jolt of adrenaline, the familiar thrill of the hunt. Jenny Albright from Bakersfield, California, a world away from the quiet New England upbringing of Genevieve Vance. She ran a new search this time for Jenny Albright and Bakersfield. The results started to trickle in, then pour. A few local news articles from the early 2000s, a mention of her winning a local beauty pageant. And then she found it. The digital Rosetta Stone that would translate Jenny Albright into Genevieve Davenport. It was a link to a fan forum for a short-lived, deeply embarrassing reality TV show from 2004. The show was called Asphalt Angels. It followed the lives of a group of young women who worked as promotional models for a local monster truck rally circuit. They were loud, crude, and desperately chasing a very different kind of fame. And one of the show's main stars, known for her sharp tongue and dramatic fights with the other girls, was a fiery blonde named Jenny Albright. Chloe's hands trembled as she clicked on a link to a video clip someone had uploaded to a forgotten platform. The video quality was terrible, but the audio was clear. There she was, a much younger, much brasher version of Genevieve Davenport, wearing denim shorts and a tank top with a beer logo on it, screaming at another woman over a parking spot. Her accent wasn't the clipped, vaguely transatlantic accent of a society matron. It was a hard, flat Californian drawl. Chloe leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. The dragon didn't just have a crack in her armor. She had a whole other life buried beneath it. A life she had clearly spent millions of her husband's dollars to erase. The whispers in the restaurant were nothing. Chloe had just found the wire, the one she could pull to make the entire carefully constructed facade of Genevieve Davenport come crashing down. The discovery of Jenny Albright changed the dynamic, but Chloe knew she had to be cautious. A direct confrontation was foolhardy. Information like this was a weapon, and like any weapon, it was only effective if deployed at the right time in the right way. For now, she kept it as her secret ace, continuing her shifts at the Gilded Quill, with the same unnerving calm as before. Her composure, however, was having an unintended effect on Genevieve. Chloe's refusal to be intimidated was like a grain of sand in the perfect sealed mechanism of Genevieve's world. It was a constant irritant. She couldn't stand it. If she couldn't break the new waitress with verbal assaults, she would have to escalate. She would have to ruin her. The attack came on the busiest night of the month, a Saturday, when the Gilded Quill was packed with Chicago's elite. The Davenports were at their usual table, hosting two other influential couples. Genevieve was the epitome of grace and charm, laughing and telling anecdotes, but Chloe, now attuned to the subtle signals, could see the tension in her jaw, the way her eyes kept flicking towards her. She was a predator, circling, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The moment came just after the main course plates were cleared. Genevieve let out a small, theatrical gasp. She brought a hand to her earlobe, her perfectly manicured fingers fluttering against her skin. "Oh my goodness," she said, her voice laced with a carefully crafted panic. "It's gone." Richard Davenport turned to her, his brow furrowing. "What's gone, dear?" "My earring," she exclaimed, her voice rising just enough to capture the attention of the surrounding tables. "My diamond earring. The ones you gave me for our anniversary, Richard. The Graf diamond. It's gone." A ripple of concern spread from their table. This wasn't just any piece of jewelry. Everyone in their circle knew the famous Davenport anniversary diamonds. They were rumored to be worth more than the average suburban house. Genevieve stood up, shaking her head in frantic disbelief. "It was here just a minute ago. I felt it. I remember fidgeting with it right before the waitress cleared my plate." Her eyes, cold and sharp as shards of glass, locked onto Chloe. "You, the waitress. You were the last one here. You were leaning over me when you took my husband's plate." The accusation was as clear as it was devastating. Chloe felt a cold dread wash over her, but her training both in the restaurant and in her past life kicked in. Stay calm. Observe. Do not react emotionally. "Mrs. Davenport," Chloe said, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "I assure you I didn't see an earring." "Of course you'd say that." One of Genevieve's friends, a woman named Beatrice, chimed in, eager to support the queen bee. "It could have fallen onto the plate, and you just whisked it away." The restaurant was now buzzing with the drama. Mr. Henderson rushed over his face, pale and slick with sweat. "Mrs. Davenport, what seems to be the trouble, Henderson," Genevieve said, pointing a trembling finger at Chloe, "is that my earring, a piece of jewelry worth $250,000, has vanished, and your waitress here was the last person near me. I want her searched. I want the kitchen searched. I want that earring found." This was the ultimate power play. It was a public branding. In this world, the word of Genevieve Davenport against that of a waitress was an open and shut case. Chloe would be fired, her reputation destroyed. The accusation of theft, even if unproven, would follow her, making it impossible to get another job in the service industry. It was a professional death sentence. Mr. Henderson looked at Chloe, his eyes pleading with her, begging her to somehow resolve this. "Chloe, did you see anything at all?" "No, sir," Chloe said firmly. "I cleared the plates and took them directly to the kitchen." "Search her pockets," Beatrice demanded. "That won't be necessary," Chloe said, her voice cutting through the noise. She looked Mr. Henderson in the eye. "I will happily empty my pockets. I have nothing to hide." She calmly took out her server's notepad, a pen, and a tube of lip balm, placing them on a nearby service stand for all to see. Genevieve scoffed. "As if you'd keep it in your pocket. It's probably in the kitchen, stashed in the garbage, waiting for you to retrieve it at the end of your shift." The trap was brilliant. The earring was most likely nestled safely in Genevieve's own clutch purse, waiting to be discovered, later after Chloe's life had been thoroughly ruined. An accusation was all that was needed. "We will of course search the kitchen," Mr. Henderson said, trying to placate her. "We will have our security look through the bus tubs." "And what about her?" Genevieve insisted, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "She should be detained. We should call the police." Richard Davenport, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "Jen, let's not be hasty," he said, a note of embarrassment in his tone. "Perhaps it just fell on the floor." "I've looked, Richard. It's not here." The staff began a frantic, humiliating search on their hands and knees, peering under tables and chairs. Chloe stood still, the silent, accused party at the center of the storm. She knew she was being framed. She knew that fighting back with denials was useless. She had to change the narrative. She had to use the one thing Genevieve didn't know she had knowledge. This was the moment to deploy her weapon not as a cannonball, but as a surgical strike. As the search continued fruitlessly, a suffocating sense of doom settled over Chloe. Mr. Henderson was wringing his hands, Genevieve was looking triumphant, and her friends were whispering their eyes, darting towards Chloe with undisguised contempt. The accusation had already solidified into fact in their minds. "We can't find anything, Mrs. Davenport." Mr. Henderson reported, his voice shaky. "Then call the police," Genevieve commanded. "I want to file a report for theft." The word theft hung in the air, a final damning verdict. Chloe knew this was her last chance. She couldn't prove her innocence regarding the earring, because the earring's location was part of the lie. But she could attack the credibility of her accuser. She could introduce an element of chaos into Genevieve's perfectly scripted drama. She took a deep breath and looked directly at Genevieve. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear and carried an unusual weight. "Mrs. Davenport, perhaps you should check your clutch again. Sometimes when things are stressful, we misplace things." Genevieve laughed a short, ugly sound. "Are you suggesting I'm being forgetful? I think not." "Not at all," Chloe said, her tone still perfectly even. "It's just that high-stress situations can be disorienting. They can make you feel like you're back in a different time, a different place entirely." She paused for a beat, letting the words hang in the air. "Like, for instance, Bakersfield." The name dropped into the charged atmosphere of the restaurant with the force of a physical blow. It was so specific, so out of place, that it created a moment of pure confusion. Richard Davenport looked puzzled. Beatrice frowned. But Genevieve froze. For a fraction of a second, the mask of the elegant society wife slipped. A flicker of raw, primal fear flashed in her eyes. It was the look of a cornered animal. Her face, which had been flushed with righteous anger, paled slightly. "What? What did you say?" She stammered, her voice losing its imperious edge. Chloe held her gaze, her expression unreadable. "I said things can be disorienting," she repeated softly. "My apologies if I misspoke." But the damage was done. The surgical strike had hit its mark. Chloe hadn't accused her of anything. She had simply said a name that meant nothing to anyone else in the room, but meant everything to Genevieve. It was a signal I know. The subtle shift in Genevieve's demeanor was palpable. Her confidence wavered. The righteous fury that had been her shield now seemed brittle. She had lost control of the narrative. Richard Davenport, sensing his wife's sudden distress, stood up. "All right, this has gone on long enough. Jen, let's just go. We'll deal with the insurance company for the earring." "No," Genevieve said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. She was rattled, her mind clearly racing to understand how this waitress could possibly know that name. It was then that Chloe played her final card for the evening. It was a gamble, a piece of psychological theater based on a hunch. "Mr. Davenport," Chloe said, turning her attention to him, "before you go, perhaps you could check the lining of your jacket pocket, the one on the right." He looked at her, bewildered. "My jacket? Why?" "Sometimes, small, heavy objects can fall without us noticing and get caught in the folds of the fabric," Chloe said, her voice calm and reasonable. "It's worth a look." Genevieve shot Chloe a look of pure venom. She knew what was happening. Chloe was offering her an escape route, but an escape route that would make her look utterly foolish. It was a checkmate. If the earring was found on her husband, the entire scene she had created would collapse into a ridiculous, hysterical farce. Hesitantly, Richard plunged his hand into his jacket pocket. He felt around his expression, shifting from confusion to surprise. His fingers closed around a small, hard object. He pulled it out. There, glittering in the palm of his hand, under the dim, expensive lighting of the gilded quill, was the missing Graf diamond earring. A collective gasp went through the room. "Well, I'll be damned," Richard muttered, staring at the earring. "It must have snagged on my cuff and dropped into my pocket when I helped you with your chair." He looked at his wife, a hint of annoyance now colouring his tone. All this fuss, Jen, and it was here the whole time. The humiliation was instantaneous and complete. Genevieve's face went from pale to a deep mottled red. She had accused a waitress of theft, demanded a police investigation, and held the entire restaurant hostage only for the earring to be found in her husband's pocket. She didn't look like a powerful victim. She looked like a fool, a hysterical, paranoid, wealthy woman who had lost her earring and thrown a tantrum. Her friends, Beatrice and the others, suddenly found the pattern on their plates intensely fascinating. The whispers around the room were no longer of theft, but of ridicule. Without another word, Genevieve snatched the earring from her husband's hand, grabbed her clutch, and stormed out of the restaurant, her head held high, but her entire posture screaming defeat. Richard Davenport was left to settle the bill, his face a mask of weary apology. He left an obscene amount of cash on the table and followed his wife out, leaving a crater of social embarrassment behind him. Mr. Henderson looked at Chloe, his expression a mixture of awe and terror. He didn't understand what had just happened, not really, but he knew that Chloe had somehow faced the dragon, and against all odds, won. Chloe took a steadying breath, her adrenaline slowly beginning to recede. She hadn't exposed Jenny Albright. She hadn't needed to. She had simply used a single word to unravel the thread of Genevieve's composure, making her look not just cruel, but utterly laughably ridiculous. And in Genevieve's world, being ridiculous was a fate far worse than being feared. The fallout from the earring incident was immediate and profound. Overnight, the dynamic at the Gilded Quill shifted. The staff no longer looked at Chloe with pity, but with a kind of bewildered reverence. She was the woman who had made the Queen look like a court jester. The fear of Genevieve Davenport hadn't vanished, but it was now mingled with a new, delicious element of mockery. Whispers followed Chloe, not of accusation, but of curiosity. How had she done it? How had she kept her cool, and what was the deal with Bakersfield? Genevieve predictably did not return the following Friday, or the Friday after that. Her absence was a palpable relief, like a storm front that had finally passed. But Chloe knew it wasn't over. A woman like Genevieve Davenport didn't forgive humiliation. She would be plotting her revenge, something more permanent and destructive than a public tantrum. Chloe knew she had to arm herself for the final confrontation. It was time to fully resurrect the ghost of Jenny Albright. Her first step was to find someone who knew Jenny before she had buried herself under layers of Davenport wealth. The reality show fan forums were a start, but they were mostly populated by anonymous screen names. Chloe needed a real person, a primary source. On one of the forums, a user named Bakersfield Born mentioned having gone to high school with Jenny. It was a long shot, but Chloe created an account and sent a carefully worded private message. "Hi there," she wrote. "I'm a researcher working on a Where Are They Now? Piece about cast members from forgotten reality shows like Asphalt Angels. I saw you mentioned you knew Jenny Albright. I'd love to hear any memories you have of her for my article. I can keep your identity completely confidential." It was a plausible lie drawing on her old skill set. For 2 days there was no reply. Chloe started to think it was a dead end. Then an email notification popped up. The user had replied providing an email address and a name, Sarah Jenkins. Chloe's heart hammered. She composed an email to Sarah repeating her cover story. The reply came within an hour. "Jenny Albright," Sarah wrote. "Wow, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. Yeah, I knew her. We were Well, I guess you could call us friends back then. Frenemies, maybe. She was always going to be a star, or so she said. What do you want to know? Over the next few days, through a series of emails, and then a long phone call, Sarah Jenkins painted a vivid picture of the woman who would become Genevieve Davenport. Jenny Albright had grown up in a run-down part of Bakersfield, the daughter of a mechanic and a checkout clerk. She was fiercely ambitious, beautiful, and possessed a burning shame about her background. She hated everything about her life. Sarah explained, her voice tinged with a mix of old resentment and pity. She thought she was better than all of us. She practiced her accent in the mirror, trying to sound like those old movie stars. She read fashion magazines like they were textbooks. Her goal was to get out of Bakersfield and never, ever look back. The Asphalt Angels show was meant to be her big break. She thought it would be her ticket to Hollywood, Sarah said with a dry laugh. But the show was a joke. It made us all look like trashy caricatures. After it was cancelled, Jenny was mortified. People would recognize her on the street and make fun of her. It was the exact opposite of the fame she wanted. It branded her as the very thing she was desperate to escape, poor and common. After the show, Jenny had a breakdown. She disappeared from Bakersfield, telling everyone she was moving to Los Angeles to pursue real acting. No one heard from her for years. Then about 10 years ago, Sarah continued her voice, lowering, I saw a picture in a magazine. Millionaire Richard Davenport to wed society belle Genevieve Vance. And I swear to God, my jaw hit the floor. It was Jenny. The hair was different. The clothes were 1,000,000 times more expensive, but it was her. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. She erased Jenny Albright and became someone else entirely. Chloe listened, scribbling notes. This was the motive, the core of Genevieve's entire being. Her cruelty wasn't just about power. It was a desperate, ongoing effort to destroy any reflection of her former self. The busboy, the waiter Chloe, in her eyes, they were all ghosts of Jenny Albright, reminders of the commonness she so deeply loathed. Is there anything else? Chloe asked, sensing there was more to the story. Any specific event she'd be terrified of people knowing. Sarah was quiet for a moment. There is one thing, she said slowly. The show's finale. The producers wanted a big finish, so they staged a monster truck princess pageant. It was the most humiliating thing you've ever seen. We had to ride on the back of a pickup truck and wave wearing cheap tiaras and sashes. Jenny, she had a complete meltdown on camera. Not one of her calculated dramatic fights, a real one. She was screaming, crying, saying how much she hated this town and everyone in it. She threw her tiara at the camera crew. It was ugly. They never aired the footage because she threatened to sue. But I know the production company has it in their archives somewhere. For Jenny, that tape would be like the end of the world. It's the ultimate proof that Genevieve Vance is a complete fraud. A tape. A piece of tangible, undeniable evidence. Chloe felt a shiver of excitement. Finding that tape would be nearly impossible. But the knowledge of the tape, that was power. She thanked Sarah profusely, promising to protect her identity. After the call, Chloe sat in the quiet of her apartment, the story of Jenny Albright laid bare before her. She now understood the dragon's deepest fear, not of being overthrown, but of being seen, of being revealed as the scared, angry girl from Bakersfield in a cheap tiara. Chloe knew Genevieve would be back. She wouldn't be able to stay away her ego, demanding she return to the scene of her humiliation to re-establish her dominance. She would come back to destroy the waitress who had seen behind the curtain. But when she did, Chloe would be ready. She wouldn't be fighting Genevieve Davenport, the millionaire's wife. She would be waiting for Jenny Albright, the girl with a terrible secret. And Chloe had the ghost of that secret sitting right in her pocket. 3 weeks after the earring incident, Genevieve Davenport returned. It was a Friday night, and a wave of tension rolled through the Gilded Quill as she swept in. This time she was alone. Her husband was conspicuously absent. She wasn't dressed in her usual elegant evening wear, but in a sharp, severe black pantsuit, as if for business or for war. She didn't wait to be seated, but walked directly to her usual table, her eyes scanning the room until they found Chloe. She crooked a single finger, a silent, imperious summons. Mr. Henderson rushed forward intending to intercept, but Chloe gave him a subtle shake of her head. This was inevitable. She smoothed her apron and walked towards the table, her heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. "Good evening, Mrs. Davenport," Chloe said, her voice neutral. Genevieve didn't return the greeting. She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Sit." It was a flagrant breach of restaurant protocol. A server never sits with a guest. "I'm on duty, Mrs. Davenport." "Sit," she repeated, her voice low and menacing. "Or I will buy this restaurant by morning and turn it into a parking garage. Your choice." Chloe pulled out the chair and sat her back perfectly straight. The other diners watched, mystified by the bizarre scene unfolding. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing," Genevieve began, leaning forward, her blue eyes burning with cold fire. "I don't know how you found out that name. I assume you dug up some dirt, tried to blackmail me in some pathetic, clumsy way. It was a mistake." "I don't know what you're talking about," Chloe said calmly. "Don't you lie to me," Genevieve hissed, her composure cracking. "You think you're clever. You think you embarrassed me. Let me tell you what's going to happen now. I have had my husband's legal team run a complete background check on you, Chloe Mitchell. I know all about your failed journalism career. I know about your student loans. I know about the tiny apartment you can barely afford. You are a nobody." She leaned back, a cruel smirk on her lips. "By the time I am finished with you, you won't even be able to get a job washing dishes. I will personally call every potential employer. I will tell them you are a thief, a blackmailer, and an unstable, vindictive little roach. I will sue you for slander. I will bury you in legal fees until you are begging for mercy. I will destroy every corner of your miserable life. Do you understand me?" Chloe listened to the litany of threats without flinching. This was the dragon's fire, the final desperate attempt to incinerate the threat. But Chloe wasn't scared of the fire anymore, because she knew what the dragon was made of. She leaned forward slightly, matching Genevieve's posture. "You're right about one thing," Chloe said, her voice soft, but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. "I am a researcher, and I am very, very good at my job. I know you're not Genevieve Vance from New England. I know you're Jenny Albright from Bakersfield, California." Genevieve's face tightened, but she held her ground. "Lies and slander. I know about asphalt angels," Chloe continued, her voice dropping even lower. "I know about the monster truck rallies, and I know about the unaired finale, the pageant, the monster truck princess pageant." At the mention of the pageant, Genevieve's composure finally completely shattered. The blood drained from her face, leaving her with a deathly pallor. This was a direct hit. This wasn't a vague mention of a town. This was a detailed kill shot. "I know about the tiara, Jenny." Chloe said, the use of the old name, a deliberate twist of the knife. "I know about the meltdown on camera, the screaming, the crying, the tape that the production company still has locked in its archives." Genevieve stared at her, speechless. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She looked not like a powerful millionaire's wife, but like the terrified girl from the past, her worst nightmare come to life. "Here is what's going to happen now," Chloe said, taking complete control. "You are going to leave this restaurant. You are never going to come back. You are not going to harass, threaten, or even speak the name of any person on this staff ever again. You are going to leave me and everyone here alone. If you do not, if I hear so much as a whisper of you causing trouble for anyone, I will dedicate my life to finding that tape. I will find it, and I will make sure it is released. I will send it to every society columnist, every gossip blog, and every one of your fair weather friends. Richard might have forgiven you for a foolish tantrum over an earring, but I wonder how he'll feel when he sees his elegant wife, Jenny, screaming about her cheap tiara on Asphalt Angels Where Are They Now? Every word was a perfectly placed blow. Chloe laid out the terms of surrender, not of a waitress to a patron, but of one woman who had the truth to another who was drowning in lies. For a long, silent moment, Genevieve simply stared. The fear in her eyes slowly gave way to a look of utter, soul-deep hatred. But she was defeated. She was completely and utterly defeated. The ghost Chloe had summoned was standing right behind her, and it had its cold hands on her shoulders. Slowly, shakily, Genevieve Davenport, or Jenny Albright, rose from the table. She didn't say a word. She didn't look at anyone. With the last shred of her dignity, she turned and walked out of the Gilded Quill for the final time. The doors swung shut behind her, and it was as if a curse had been lifted. A stunned silence filled the dining room, followed by a quiet, spontaneous burst of applause from the kitchen staff who had been watching from the doorway. Mr. Henderson walked over to Chloe, his eyes wide with disbelief. I don't know what to say." Chloe finally let out a long, shuddering breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She stood up and picked up the water pitcher from her service station. "Don't worry, Mr. Henderson," she said, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time all night. "Table 4 needs more water." She was no longer just Chloe Mitchell, the waitress. She was the woman who had faced the dragon and sent it running from its own lair, not with fire or fury, but with the quiet, undeniable power of the truth. And just like that, the reign of terror was over. The story of what happened that night at the Gilded Quill became a legend whispered among the city's service industry, a tale of how a quiet waitress with a spine of steel toppled a tyrant, not with shouting or revenge, but with quiet competence and a well-placed fact. Genevieve Davenport was never seen in that part of the city, again a ghost in her own gilded cage, haunted by a past she could no longer control. Chloe Mitchell. She didn't stay a waitress for long. Her actions caught the attention of a wealthy patron who admired her courage and intellect, and she was offered a job as a private investigator, returning to the work she truly loved. This story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about how loud you can shout, but about the courage to stand firm in the truth. It shows that bullies, no matter how rich or powerful, are often just scared people hiding behind a fragile mask. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about unexpected heroes and the quiet triumph of justice.